Good morning, everybody, and welcome to NorCal Slot Car Scene. This is Jim Rose, and today we've got two or maybe three special guests with us. If you're fans or participants in Fray racing, you'll definitely recognize Rick Phillis. And our other gentleman here is Bob Marketos. And what a lot of people don't know is Bob was also one of the co-founders, or I'll let them explain it, but of the Fray. And so the Fray started in when, 1999, I think it was? 1997, so almost 25 years now. And a lot of people don't really know the origin of the Fray. Everybody's used to the Fray now, and I've been there for about 10 or 12 years. And when I started, it was all routed tracks. There were 9 or 10 tracks, I think, the first time I was there, and everybody knows Rick Phillis. But a lot of people don't know Bob, and I'm going to let them start. And I'll start with Bob and the two of you. How did you first meet?
Okay, I guess that's me. All right. So I just a little bit detailed, but I'll give it to you once, and then I'm pretty much going to go head to the background.
He'll get it wrong.
This whole thing, I probably will. Okay, so
you notice we have them in the same camera shot, so obviously they're still friends.
This is the original book that came with my first set, which was the classic 50, if people can see that. And I think Jim will edit the film to give you a inset of those.
Was that in a vibrator set or a T-jet set?
This was a vibrator set.
Okay, so this is you did pre-T-jets.
This was 1960 December. I got my first set when it came out. I gave that set up in 67 to my cousins. In 87, I'm going kind of fast now with the timeline, I called them from California, where I'd moved, and asked my cousins to send me the stuff I gave them, and they did. And in it were a couple of cars were left. The track was there, and this book was there. So I went to the back of the book, and I had purchased Tomy cars or something like that, or Tycos, and if you ever tried to put a car like that with a steering wheel controller, you know it's like an on-off switch. It just didn't work. So the inside of this manual had listed everybody's address and phone number for the toy stores that carried the Aurora products. So I started calling San Francisco. I was living in Petaluma at the time. I called San Francisco. I called LA. I called Seattle. I called Denver. I called Dallas. I called Houston. I called finally Michigan. And the Michigan guy said, I don't have any of that old slot car stuff, but there's a guy who has a newsletter in Baltimore named Ken Shapiro, who has the newsletter that HO USA that probably will put you in contact for that kind of stuff. So I called Ken, and he says, oh yeah, there's this guy north of you in your neighborhood, because 2.5 hours away is the same area code on the phone. So he thought we were close.
It was back then, yeah.
And it was Rick. Okay. And then about 2 months after our conversation, and this is typically Rick, I mean, the guy travels to do this all, he's sitting here now coming back from a trip all over the East and Midwest for the last 2 weeks. So he comes in, I'm sitting at as it happens, I'm sitting at my 4x8 2-lane track that I had nailed to the, so I could lift it up into the garage wall. And I look down, I sense something, and I look down, I see the boots, and I come up, and about 6'2" or 3 later, there's a guy in a flannel shirt that goes, that's not what you want to do. And he throws a picture down on my table, and he goes, this is what you want to do. And that was it. So at that point, I was hooked. And I think you're going to post a picture of this more clearly for people. So I got the HO USA magazine, and I started connecting with a guy named Ham in Dayton, Ohio. I can't remember his first name. And he sold me enough track to make 4 of these. I had so much of this track. Rick had the same collection. He had piles of them, and in drawers in where he used to hold the races.
So that track you just showed us was your track.
No, this was his.
Okay.
His track. Okay, so and I didn't line that up very well. All right, I'm almost done. So I collected all these tracks. I made the typical 6x14 track that we now know as a Fray track with the controllers all around the track. Back then, we used to connect them all the controllers were connected to the bottom center of the track with wires. And when we raced, we would, am I missing any of this? Okay. So what we would do is you would select your lane color and position. So we'd slide the controller under the track to get to the position on the table where you wanted to be and your lane choice.
So your controller stayed attached to the track at all times?
Stayed attached at all times. They were Parma economies. Okay. And they were 35 or 45 ohm, I forget which. So, and I hope you're going to post the Three Amigos link of that, those old videos that I have. They're kind of fuzzy, but
yeah, you'll see the link up on the top right of the screen.
Yeah, you'll see how we were doing. So after about 2 or 3 years of maybe longer, going back and forth between Ferndale and they would come here, we would go there in Petaluma. Rick comes
for those of you, just real quick, for those of you not familiar with the Fray, Petaluma, where Bob lives, is about an hour north of San Francisco. Ferndale is about another 3 hours north of that. So we're on the northern part of California.
Correct, along the
north
coast
of San Francisco.
We're in the coastal ranges, and he says to me, "Why don't we have?" We started calling this the Invitational. I guess it went on for about 10 years, 9 years, whatever. There were
5 or 6.
5 or 6 every year. It would be one race there, one race here. Okay, at my place. And Rick one day comes up and says,
actually in January we would come to Petaluma, and in July you guys would come to Ferndale.
Very good. I'd forgotten that.
No. So two races a year. That good, interesting concept. Do that again.
Yeah, and we had a shirt. We made a shirt. One of the wives, I think, did the Steve's wife, I believe. Steve, the tall dude with a anyway. Turf and Talon Award was the name. Was the shirt, and we had a chicken claw, and a cow hoof. Okay, was Turf and Talon Award, because up there was cows and down here we're the chicken capital of the world. So after a while, Rick says, "Why don't we invite 2 other teams and have 2 tables?" I said, "Great idea." Now this is where the only thing that I did really, now, because there's claims made that I'm a whatever of the Fray. I want to put that to rest. That's not really true. What happened was, after he decided to do this, he said 2 tables and 4 teams. What he did all on his own was gather 8 teams and 4 tables and put them in the Portuguese Hall. And that's how the Fray started. That's the story of the Fray.
So the original Fray started at the Portuguese Hall. Currently, it's at the fairgrounds in Ferndale, but that's still in Ferndale, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Now, a lot of this was helped by the fact that of HO World, or HO USA, which went from Ken Shapiro to Rick Burnison in Southern California, and from there I took it to howorld.net, and that ability to communicate had a lot to do with it. But also, this guy travels all over the place, and you guys all know what he does, because he's been to your home, and that type of what do we call that? That type of
basically he's an ambassador for the sport.
That type of ambassadorship was what really made this event. And let's give the title where it belongs to Rick Machado, who is the support for that whole thing. That's the rent, the guy behind the scenes that nobody ever mentions. So the Fray itself, after the Invitational, that Fray itself is the 2 Ricks. pretty much. All right, I'm pretty much done with my story. That's about it. The rest of it is him.
You cover all your notes, sir?
Yeah, I think I did. Oh, one last picture. Because this is in Three Amigos. That is probably the coolest track ever built. And personally, I'm ready to go back to black plastic.
That looks like spaghetti to me.
You can't imagine what that was like.
That makes the red track look like a freeway.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. All right, there he is. You got him.
Well, Rick, welcome to NorCal Slot Car Scene.
Thank you.
And it's great to have you here. I met you at the very first fray that I went to. I think you came down to a race before the fray in Northern California. And then the first fray that I went to, like I said, was about 12 years ago. So before that, these were all lock and joiner tracks.
Yeah, initially they were all lock and joiner. As we did those exchanges of the invitational race between Ferndale and Petaluma, the interest grew in the Petaluma Santa Rosa area, where you also had a Santa Rosa team. And in Ferndale area, we had Eureka, which there was a group there. And so there was one event where the Eureka and Ferndale teams traveled south, and Ferndale raced Santa Rosa in Santa Rosa, while Eureka raced Petaluma in Petaluma. And then we got together and had lunch. And then Ferndale raced Petaluma in Petaluma, while Eureka raced Santa Rosa in Santa Rosa. And on the way home, I was just riding along, and I got to thinking, well, what if you got all the tables and all the people in the same room? And bounced that idea around, and yeah, that seemed viable. And the more people I talked to, the more interest there was. And we ended up setting up 4 lock and joiner tables on 6 by 14 tables. One of them, actually, the first year was a 6 by 16 table, and away we went. From then,
about that.
Yeah, it several years in the Portuguese Hall, which became too small, and then we moved to the fairgrounds. It was, nothing was planned. It just took on a life of its own.
So did that all start out as those were 6-lane lock and joiner tracks?
Yes.
And then, so the very first fray, you said how many teams were there at the very, what we call the fray?
Yeah, 8.
8 teams. And so
Yeah.
what's the largest number of teams that we've had at the fray?
16.
16. So it's grown tremendously since, what did you say, 1997?
Yeah.
I do see a lot of those tracks very similar to the tracks we run now, but now they're Brad Bowman routed tracks.
Yes. Yes. So a lot of them, like the red table, the green table, are based on what was once the lock and joiner track. And if you really look at it, you'll see the similarities.
I've seen, especially on the yellow track, it looks almost identical.
Yellow,
The others are very similar.
Yeah.
It's interesting too that you've been around the country racing, that these fray tables, like the blue table, the black table, they've spawned clones all throughout the country. It's just absolutely amazing. We have 2 black layouts in Northern California. I know there's one in the Midwest. There may be some others as well. I think there's 2 in the Midwest.
Oh yeah, I've raced on versions of the green and the black back east. I mean, you go all that distance and you got the same track you have at home.
Well, it's kind of an advantage, I guess.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that, but
Well, the 2 black tables that we have in Northern California race very differently. They're the surfaces and the rails and everything else, but the layout's the same.
mm-hmm.
You think it is, but then they put a bump somewhere or bank somewhere, and it changes.
You can never get the elevations identical.
Yeah.
And when the
we have
black
to be,
track was first made, when that black track was first made, and what's his name owned that?
Rick Martin.
Rick Martin owned this track. He put a hump down the straightaway. The cars would launch. I mean, they'd catch air for about 3 feet. All right, if you came full speed. So that had to be lowered. And stuff like that happens. The table, what was the copy of my blue table? The tan?
Oh, yeah, the tan one.
The tan. Okay, so the tan at the fray is a copy of my original track, except he narrowed it 4 inches to get it within the 6-foot width parameter, and they banked the first corner. So those types of things occur when you get the clones that you're talking about.
Well, and then he did something crazy and reversed the direction of that track.
Mm-hmm. And there's that.
So that was one of the first tracks that I raced on when I got back into HO was your track that was at Paul Josephie's house.
Mhm.
And they decided to run it backwards. But Paul's track, or your track at Paul's track, didn't have a bank in it. So where did those original layouts come from? Like the blue and the red and the green and those seem to be the predominant ones. Not so much the red, but the blue, the tan, the black, and the green. Were those from you, Rick? The design layouts?
The black track was entirely designed by Brad Bowman at the instruction of Rick Martin. And Rick Martin, he said, all I want is a track that will piss people off. And Brad came up with the black version. The tan one, Bob, you would have to speak to that. I had no input on that design.
I had Adobe Illustrator, and it allowed me to do these vector type templates of all the possible combinations of track. And then I just, they would, when you brought it close to each other, they would, what's that? I forget what that's called now. But essentially you're laying it out like you would if you were on a table with it, but I could do it on the computer. And I had a lot of conversations with Brad Bowman over this before we did it. It took about 6 months of back and forth changing, because he's very good at determining lefts and rights and making sure that the distances are the same left and right. Because that track, at least my blue one, I don't know that much about the Fray tan table, but my blue one, you could win either direction from any lane. You could get a winner, and that was what was important to me. And it's the current situation with the track I have out in the garage, either direction, any lane. And that was important to me. And I don't find that true with a lot of them. A lot of times the blue or the red is a problem child, but the designs came off of Illustrator.
Do either of you have, we'll start with Bob, do you have a favorite of the tracks at the Fray, the current tracks or the layouts?
Yeah, that's an easy one for me. And I'm sorry it ever got to be CNC, but the yellow table's my favorite.
Well, I was hoping you weren't going to say purple.
No. But I do well on the purple. I mean, considering my abilities at this stage of my life, but the yellow is my favorite. That's a tricky table, and I take advantage of that hump. That hump is an advantage to me because I've dealt with it my whole life. Every track I ever had that hump track or that bridge track. What do we call those things?
It's a bridge track.
Bridge track. There we go.
And the yellow track is kind of to me, it's kind of a throwback because it does look like it's still made out of lock and joiner. They're 90-degree corners and things like that, and the hump.
Yeah.
Some of the others, a little bit more flowing.
Well, that type of thing. Sorry to talk over.
Rick, do you have a favorite of any of the tracks?
My favorite would probably be the gold track table. Yeah, definitely the gold table.
Really,
That tells you how different we are, by the way, because I hate that table.
The gold table, you'll see a picture on the video, but it's a big flowing track, then with a few switchbacks in it, so it's a whole different style.
Yeah, it has a technical section at one end that has a great rhythm to it, and big wide turns where you can really keep the speed up, and it's just a good all around table.
One man's great rhythm is another man's thorn in his foot.
Okay, there's one track that wasn't there when I started. I'm going to have to ask what the origin of that track was. And people love it or hate it. How did the pink track come to be?
The pink track. That's the one we'll be starting the race season with. It came from an event I went to, the East Coast Challenge, which was basically the East Coast version of the Fray. And Paul Niffen would build a track. Paul Niffen has match tracks, and he would build a track and bring it to this event. And of course, it was for sale. And I mean, what a great place to sell a track because everybody get to race on it. And he had that, depending on your perception, some people call it the toilet bowl, other people call it the carousel. But yeah, he had that, and I thought, wow, well, with CNC routing, you could make that a nice, continuous, gradually increasing radius, and then literally go down the straightaway. And that was the origin of the pink table.
So I think, yeah, it's kind of a love-hate. I like it. I think Jeff Kratz hated it until last Fray.
Yeah, I think so.
And so Yeah, it's an interesting track. So that's the track. It's also interesting. The day after the fray is the cleanup day. And typically there's a few people that go and help Rick clean up this hall that 90 or so guys have been in and gals have been in for a week, and it's a chore to clean up. But the tracks themselves are interesting because they go next door to the storage area and they're lined up like on a bookshelf. So that's one of the reasons, I guess, why they're all 6 by 14 feet. They go into almost like a bookshelf, and you can take one out and play with it and put it back. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah. Well, the idea is throughout the race season to have run and tested every track and computer system. So by the time the fray comes around, they've all been used and any problems have been resolved on each one. So, and as the fray's evolved, a lot of people are intimidated because of the caliber of some of the teams and drivers there. But what I try to express to them is that the caliber of drivers is across the board. You can cobble together a team and come in there, and there'll be teams you can run with. There'll be teams you can beat. There'll be teams that are going to be a learning curve for you, literally. And but it really is across the board, wouldn't you say?
I think it is.
Yeah, it's such a fun event. It's got to be a bucket list for any slot car racer, let alone HO slot car racer. The first time I was there, I'd raced for about 6 months, gotten pretty decent, got up there, and the intimidating factor to me was learning 10 tracks. It had nothing to do with the people. It's a great group of people. Everybody, for the most part, everybody helps everybody. There's always stuff to buy there, whether it's collectible HO cars or any of the parts you need to put a car together. So it's just a spectacular event. I typically go up on Monday, and the actual race, the team race is on Saturday, and the individual race is on Friday. So you can go up there and practice for 3 or 4 days, and there's virtually no waiting, because even if there's 90 people, there's 60 lanes.
Yeah. I want to bring something up that is changed now. You just mentioned that it was 2 days. The original fray was a 1-day event, and it was a real marathon. I don't know if you ever experienced that, but both races, the individual and the team were done on the same day. So it went from 8 in the morning till about 11 at night or whatever.
Well, but there was also fewer teams.
There were fewer teams, but you were burned out. So it was a real marathon. I mean, you were hitting the wall, like a marathon. You hit the wall at 20 miles or 22 miles. This was that kind of an event. So the guy who lasted to the end, that still had his faculties, was, it was pretty. And then we would go out and eat afterwards. And I mean, the buzz, the energy from that was, since it's gone to a 2-day event, I haven't seen that type of energy. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that particular type of energy that we got from doing it all in 1 day there was a lot of guys who would do the race and then go home. I did it myself on a couple occasions. I think I did it once with Bill Lee, who's sitting over here, by the way.
We were younger then.
Yeah, it was an incredible time. And putting these tracks together, because during the invitational days, we would change tracks about every 3 months, 4 months. Now imagine 100 pieces of track plus all the shims that were needed so that you always had to drop down. So you always had to put a shim on the backside, and you could only go one direction. It was black plastic track, it was lock and joiner. And then what you had to do around the curves with the railroad, what do you call that? Cork bedding. All right. And that required a piece of cardboard under it. So we were cutting all this stuff. And every 3 months, you'd go in the garage and set these things up. And it was just incredible what the type of stuff we were doing when you look back, you look back at it.
Well, obviously the tracks have evolved from lock and joiner to I think a combination of lock and joiner and routed, now all routed.
Yeah.
What about the cars?
Guys drive 57 Chevys and enjoy it. Yeah. And it's kind of like that, it is throwback.
What about the cars though? That original fray, the cars, I guess, were a lot closer to stock, if you want to call it stock, or because they've evolved obviously over the years.
Yeah, that came over time. Originally we were running the Tyco front ends,
Yeah.
and the slip-on silicones in the back. Some were even running AJs, the old threaded on AJs originally.
Most of them was Heaster silicone in the back. Though.
Yeah.
We found Tommy Heaster. We found Tommy Heaster for silicone, and that stuff was awesome. It changed the whole deal.
So going back just a little, where did the term Fray come from?
Now, I'm going to take credit for this one. That was me, right? I came up with it. Alliteration, Fray and Ferndale. For Ferndale, and I looked up war or something like that, and the first word that began with an F in the thesaurus was pretty much like that. And then I suggested it to Rick, and he bought it.
Yeah, Bob would do little write-ups of our invitational races as we went back and forth. And when I told him about I'm setting up all these tables for all these teams to try an event, he put out a little flyer announcing there would be a Fray in Ferndale, and the name stuck.
So it stuck with the cars too, because now you go out throughout the country and you're racing Fray cars.
Yeah, and that wasn't planned either.
So those first cars, they slip on silicones. What magnets were being used back then? The original
stock magnets.
These were stock cars. The bodies were stock. We hollowed them out and lowered them. A guy named Cole, what was his first name? Bruce Cole came one time with a Camaro, and he had it slammed so that he took out the back window and slammed it, so the gear plate came through the back window hole.
So that's where that started.
That's where that started, as far as I remember. Okay, that's
about right.
And then one time, see, the whole goal with us in Petaluma to race Ferndale was to go after Rick Machado. That was our thing. So one day,
were you trying to beat Rick, or were you trying to mess with Rick?
Oh, mess with him, absolutely. Okay. He was the target. So,
and he's not here to defend himself.
One day he came with a car that had springs in the front, and I said, no way in hell are you running that thing, right? And so, of course, up in arms and all, but he ended up having to put that car away. Eventually, I think we adopted that, though. Eventually, we adopted it, and but that's the kind of thing that was going on back then. Nowadays, everybody's pretty staid. They don't, there's no. Back then it was just chatter, go after the guy, talk about his sister, and it was just a lot of fun, and that's all gone away. Now I go to a race and they push me out of the way, physically put their hands on me to push me out of the way. Back then we were laughing at each other. I don't know what happened, but
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that at the last Fray. I didn't know that was you.
Yeah.
Now I'll have to indulge it. Our strategy coming down to Petaluma, and I would specifically coach the guys on this, is to complain about the track.
Yeah.
Find something to complain about, and that would rattle Bob, and that took care of his performance.
I didn't know this, but I'm learning about that for the first time. But that's how we did it. I mean, that was, and you can imagine professional sports, that's what they're doing. They're facing each other at the line. They're jawing back and forth.
You were well ahead of your time.
Now you can't. I was copying what they were doing, and now, you need a freaking pass to get to the side of the table, and there's rules now. I got behavioral rules. Oh boy, is that a problem for me? That kind of thing.
Now we do have the very first individual Fray winner here, so you ought to get a word in with him.
Bill Lee, welcome to NorCal slot car scene. I've raced with Bill quite a few times over the years, and great guy, obviously a great racer because he is a Fray champion. So welcome to the video.
You'll have to clarify a little bit. I was not the first individual winner. Rick Machado was. I did qualify number one through the team races, but I didn't. I came in third in the A main. Rick Phillis here was number two in the A main, and actually we have another gentleman here that was also in that original A main. Mark Daniel, he ran at that time. So we got half of the A main competitors from the very first Fray at this table right now.
Cars were a little bit slower then, obviously.
Yeah. You talk a little bit about what was the setup on the cars. The chassis was, at least what I was running, was completely stock. The gears were exactly as Aurora installed them. I didn't change anything. I ran Aurora pickup shoes, springs. I even used the original motor brushes that came with the chassis. At that time, I could get a new chassis, original NOS chassis, for $6-7 is about what it costs to get a new chassis. Change the wheels and tires, put a body on it, lower the body down, and you were ready to go. No balancing of the motors.
I would love to.
Yeah, no restricted shoe work or anything like that. You know, it was pretty stock running stuff at that time.
Back in the good old days.
Yeah, well, yeah. It was a little easier to prepare a car at that time. Still a lot of luck though. Some of them ran, some of them didn't, just like today. So, but yeah, it's it changed over the years. At that time, you couldn't balance the motors, and yeah, you could run different ohms, but we found that the stock T-Jet ohms over a little over 16 were a little easier to drive, especially with 45 or 60 ohm controllers, a little easier to control on those kind of lock and journey tracks at the time.
So one of my next questions was, we'll start with Bill, and then we'll go back to Rick and Bob. But what's your most memorable fray or memorable moment at the fray?
The first one was as you walked in, and we just started the very first race. The tension level in the building was probably higher than I've ever seen since. It was the first time anybody had ever been to a race that big, and the nerves were, everybody was on edge, and it was, I ran a car at that time, and just because of the nerves, I picked a car that was settled or was friendly to drive, and people were crashing right and left just from the stress level. And I finally changed to a car that was even slower because I felt bad because I couldn't run with anybody because people were just crashing right and left.
Well, most people aren't used to going to a race, no matter who they are. And I mean, there's 90 other people there to race with.
Yeah.
And you talk about the tension level. I know the original fray, I don't think there was actual individual qualifying, but now there is. So you qualify with 60 or 80 or 90 guys around you watching.
Yeah, that was one of the big changes, is because we ran it all in one day. The seating for the mains was determined by where you finished in the team racing events. So we did it a little bit different. We didn't have qualifying. We used the team events to determine the seating for the mains.
Yeah, because now qualifying takes about 2 hours.
Yeah, probably one of the best changes, I think, in terms of how it was run, was the original mains were one heat. So even the A main was one heat. I don't know how many laps, Rick, 30, 50? 50. But I mean, for the A main was
100. We did.
No,
Not for the fray, though.
you did
Oh,
30 or 50, was it?
Could have been.
I think it was a 30 lap A main in one heat. So if somebody lost it in the first turn and took you out, your chances of coming back are not very good. You have to be awfully lucky. And the very first A main that I ran in, the table, we didn't really understand, I think, how to organize the fan base for this, but everybody crowded the table. It was a lot like a gaming table in Las Vegas. And I was one of the last ones to get up to the table to pick my spot. And the local guys like Rick here, they knew where to stand so they could see. I came down the straight at the start. I didn't see my car through the first turn, second turn, third turn. I was just guessing what the layout was based on running on it once earlier that day. And I guessed wrong. And I launched off of a bridge track, maybe one of the classic launches ever in an A main, maybe. But they put my car back on, and I went from 6th up to 3rd. But I wasn't going to catch these local guys at that time. But yeah, it was that single heat A main was tough. But then by 2000, a few years later, Rick changed it to running around the lanes for the A main, and you get an opportunity to run each lane, and so you can recover from an off that you have a lot better. And I was able to win that main event, A main, at that time, but I never could win it when it was only one heat. There was always something that would happen to me. but when they ran all the lanes, all 6 lanes for the A mains, it gives you a lot better chance to overcome any exciting things that might happen during the racing.
What would you say for your most memorable Fray event?
I gotta say it was the first one. I agree with him because of the tension. He's got it perfect. Whatever Bill said there was exactly my experience.
And there's nothing like that first time when you walk into that hall and see 10 tracks. It's intimidating.
Yeah, you have a list of firsts that are great, and that's one of them. I mean, yeah, that's what it was because of the tension.
Go over to Rick. What's you may have more than one. Any
Oh, well, one of my favorites was probably about the third fray or fourth fray. And as my friends are helping get things set up and the track's running, Mr. Marketos walks in and he's got all these labels and he slaps it down on the table and he says, "Here," he says, "this event has grown. Make sure everyone puts their name on this so we know who everyone is." And I thought about that as I kept going and getting things ready. And then when a friend of mine came in, I says, "Hey, Dennis, got a job for you. Just take these labels and write Slot Car Bob on all of them." And as people came in, I gave them their name tag. And Bob was there for about an hour and a half before he figured out. He was very pleased when he saw everybody wearing name tags. And finally, he realized they all said the same thing. That was very memorable.
Yeah,
Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that was a good one.
It's interesting. We did a chat with another group of mine the other day, and the same question. And the answer was never, "I won this race," or "I did this race." It's always about the people, the camaraderie, the practical jokes like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
or just bench racing afterwards. So it's the sport is the sport, but what everybody remembers is the other things that happened.
Yes. Mr. Bill Kurtz, he after he came out to the fray, he wrote up a thing. It might have been an HOUSA, I don't remember, but I remember his comments. He came in there, he was overwhelmed with all the tables, and he said he could not believe the camaraderie. He said it was hard to believe these were your competitors because they helped him so much. And he came from the New York area, and it was very interesting reading his perspective. So, but there's lots of memorable moments. I couldn't list them all.
Has Bill been to another one?
He did come to a few more.
A
Yeah.
few more. Okay.
We've had people from literally all over the world come.
There are
a couple.
One guy from England.
Yeah.
One time.
Tony.
Yeah. And but yeah, that's been quite a draw. We'll get a call, somebody I'd never even heard before, and they say, "Hey, I want to come out." Okay.
And keep in mind where Ferndale is in relation to the rest of the United States. I mean, you got to land an SFO and take a 5-hour drive north through the redwoods to get to a beautiful spot. But
yeah,
I mean,
you think about California and the guys from Southern California, it's about a 10 or 12-hour drive?
Yeah.
From the end of the state to the other?
It's close to a 12-hour drive for them.
I'm getting so I can't stand to drive anymore. I wish there was an airplane. Well, there is actually, but
yeah, there is an airport up in Arcata. So, but I don't think they bring 747s in there.
No. They're puddle jumpers.
Yeah.
I mean, you fly at like 5,000. I've done it. You fly at about 5,000 feet. I used to get up there a lot. I did. You know, it was just. I thank him for introducing me to this thing because it's just what, look, Slot Car Bob is a misnomer. I'm not really, never have been that, I've never really impacted this hobby to any great degree, but what he's introduced me to from that day he dropped that picture down, it's integral in my life. I mean, everybody sees me in the garage all the time playing with slot cars wherever I live. And it's just several hours of my life every week. And it's been that way for 60 plus years.
And Rick has been doing it, like you said, as an ambassador. I've only been to 2 races that I recall out of state. One was in the Coral, which is a fray race. And one was the Ecor Challenge, which you mentioned before in Pennsylvania. And both times Rick was there.
That's it.
My teammate, I think, at the Ecor Challenge. And so can you think of how many HO racetracks that you've been to?
Oh, I added several this weekend.
There you
This
go.
last weekend,
So
yeah.
when you hear these trips that you're taking, these are typical, are these all pleasure trips or a little business on the side? Or
Well, no, there's business too. I'll go to the East Coast to take care of some properties. And there's kind of, it's twofold. There's the excuse is to go work. The reason is to go race.
There you go. By the way, you know what you've never mentioned is the Red Store. How it all got started for you.
Well, yeah, in 1967, the owners of what's the Red Front Store in Ferndale was a sporting goods store, and they went and bought a tub track, an orange Aurora tub track. And so that's how the kids in Ferndale all started racing. And away we go from there.
Yeah.
back then in the mid-60s, well, first of all, there were a lot of hobby shops. And
Yes.
every hobby shop sold Aurora T-Jets. And you know, the T-Jet, whatever they called it, the Ford Aurora National Championship was on nationwide TV. So that's how big HO slot car racing is. And the Fray cars are based on those Thunderjets
Mhm.
from the 60s, and you can still find new cars out there, new old stock.
Yes.
So they
I
built
have-
that many. They,
I have a
I don't know
box
what the estimate, but it's in the millions of how many cars they built.
Oh, they outsold Ford and GM combined. Yeah.
Well, $2.39 in the car, but yeah.
Well, if you look at that on YouTube, you'll find that one of those championships was on the Ed Sullivan Show. I think one was on
Johnny
Mike Douglas,
Carson.
one was on the Carson Show, and
Yeah.
they had grand marshals like Jackie Stewart,
Yeah.
Sterling Moss. So it was
Yeah.
big. So they could
It was
afford to
big.
do that back then, and it's all grown out. And so you've kept that flame or whatever you call it. You've kept that alive with those Aurora Thunderjets.
Yeah, you got to be twisted. But
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
still remember one time.
Twisted, that's the first.
Bob flies up to Ferndale. We were mentioning about that little hop. He flies up to Ferndale to come race on a Tuesday night. I pick him up at the airport. As we're driving to Ferndale, he announces he forgot his cars.
Oh, well.
Go to a race and forget your cars. Yeah,
Oh, well.
that's something only Bob could accomplish.
You know what, though? That's another interesting thing, because when we first started this, even before I had like 35, 40 guys that were coming around. He had an equal number. We gave the guys the cars too. And it was real easy to keep them tuned because there was nothing to it. It was a T-Jet. But we handed them cars. So everybody kind of had their favorite, you know, whether it was based on the body style or whatever. But, you know, handing out cars and controllers was part of it back then in the beginning. You know, it was all, like I said, the controllers were hooked to the tables. And did you do that?
Mhm.
Yeah, yours were hooked to the
Oh, yeah.
I remember being in the saloon, and by the way, do you have a picture of the saloon that you can get to so you can see where the estate?
Oh, the track shack.
Yeah, the track shack. The dump that he used to live in to race while he was going to college to get his degree. Okay, and he was running the farm. The story of this guy's life is pretty incredible. But anyway, the point I'm making is, though, that we used to hand out everything for everybody because it was hard for these guys to maintain the stock. And you know, one of the first things I did was went out and bought 2 cases of chassis. So, and back then, 100 cars were $300 for the 2 boxes. And Rick did similarly, and he had in the track shack, he had a drawer that was filled with black plastic. And I had a similar situation here in my garage. So we had the tracks. We bought economy controllers were what, $15 or something.
Yeah.
So we had, you know, tied them to the table. We had 6 of those ready to go. You know, everything was bullet connectors, so we could undo them if the controller broke or whatever. You just throw another one on there. It was that kind of thing. It was you know, like going to a hobby store when you came to our tracks.
So it's also amazing to me that you guys and Rick and Bob, you're part of this too, started the Fray. And now you go, like you said, different places in the country, and Rick will show up driving his car typically. And how many miles have you got in the new car?
Oh, we're still working on that one. Yeah,
What new car?
he's referring to the old Sprint Ferrari.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that thing.
Chevy
Yeah.
Sprint?
The Chevy
Oh
Sprint,
my
86 Chevy Sprint. Yeah, I drove that car for 30 years.
And how many
You
miles?
drove I drove it to a race in Idaho once, Machado and I. And it finally, at 430,000
Wait
miles.
a minute. I got in this thing. He used to have a spider that lived in the corner.
It's-
You'd get in and there'd be a web going all the way up the A post. All right. And every time that little sucker would come out, he'd go back down. And he lived there for what? I don't know, years, I
The
guess.
spider's name was Bob.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, but back to my point, sort of, it must be satisfying for both of you that now throughout the country, people race HOT jet cars, but they're called freight cars. Because
Yeah,
it's,
cool.
it's not often
Yeah.
that something like this starts and that, somebody else will copy it, but they'll call it their own name. But freight
Yeah.
cars are known throughout the country, even, the
You know what it is.
doesn't use the word freight in the name, but it is a freight race, so.
Yeah.
And by the way, there is a freight table and it has to be a freight table, it has to be 6x14. It has to have six lanes, 6 stations around the table. That's a freight table, and it was based on the tub track. I would guess that's where you drew inspiration.
No, because they were all lined up on one side.
Yeah, but I'm saying the 6 lane and the spaghetti and that type of thing. Although he did do the overpass thing on all the tracks, which made them equal.
Well, that's another thing I like about the freight tracks, and I'm not sure who came up with this idea or invented it. In 24 scale racing, there's called European rotation. So you go from one lane, you skip one lane, you skip one lane. So nobody's next to each other on the track all the time. But the rotation on a freight table is built into the track. You just go left or right around the track, but those lanes skip. Who came up with that idea? Because I think it's ingenious.
Well, yeah, that was something I raced and had an experience where you had that one guy inside of you all across the track.
Probably Bob.
Yeah, and so
you don't want to pass me on the outside. You
Yeah.
don't want to do that.
I remember asking somebody, there's got to be a better way, and they were talked about a European rotation. And so when we set up the freight tracks, we did it specifically for 2 reasons. One, so you wouldn't have the same person beside you all the time, and it would always keep members of the other team on either side of you. And so as you go through the rotation, that's always the case. And at any given heat, there's always 3 members of each team on the table.
But boy, that would be a real pain in the butt if we had to do that and the lanes were lined up consecutively and we had to skip over, but having that rotation built into the track.
Built in, yeah.
Yeah.
It takes, people go from one lane to the other and they don't even question about where it is. And they just, okay, this one's yellow, you go to the yellow.
And it's the only tracks that I know of in slot car racing where 3 of the driver stations are on one side and 3 on the other side. So even though you're next to, it's a lane adjacent, it's a whole different look. You have to learn the look of each lane.
The perspective changes
Yeah,
when you
yeah,
cross.
perspective
When you
is
go
totally
from
different.
yellow to white, that's a big deal. That really screws up your head. It
Well,
doesn't. I've always had trouble in that white lane, always.
No, he's always had the screwed up head.
Yeah.
A lot of innovations have come out of the fray. So
Yeah.
and now back to the cars for a minute. We, in the team race, we can actually build a car, a freight car, or if you're just not racing, if you're building your own freight car, you can build a car without any original Aurora parts in it. It's amazing that concept is kept going.
Yeah, other than the individual race. Well, you've had so many aftermarket cottage industry replacement parts. It's a wonderful thing. Who would have ever thought when we started,
Yeah, really.
that you could get a crown gear with a hole in the middle? That was amazing.
The guys that are out there doing this, the Wizards Dash, boy, I don't want to, one stop, RTHO. These are incredible people
Oh, yeah,
that took risk
yeah,
to do this.
yeah. One stop, slop shot.
You
Yeah.
can't, Bob's. I'm trying to remember all these places. I hope you list a few places to get where people can get the parts. And now the new controllers that are out there, we were using Parma, or actually we started out with Aurora.
The risk gets sent.
the rust kit type Aurora things. So, you know, we're grateful to these guys for what they've done and certainly enhanced the hobby. And they took all the risk.
Yeah, because you know, this is a big event for us and it's a huge event for HO racing, but in the overall scheme of things, there's not a lot of people, you know, there's not millions of people racing HO slot cars like there were in the 60s.
Mhm.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
like I said, for them to take a risk, a business risk is a big deal.
Yeah, but we're maybe 10, 15,000 guys doing this. I don't know the number exact, and I pulled that one out of my ass, if I can say that. But whatever that number is, it's certainly not the millions of sets that were sold back in the 60s, but we're avid. You know, these are guys that are avid. The question is, how do you bring in younger guys? And that's the question. What's got to change to get the younger guy interested? And that's another debate, but we have to think about it.
Well, let's think about it
because-
after our generation, because those younger kids are usually faster. So
Yeah.
well, think about that in 10 years or so.
You know, that's how sports are, and this is a sport, and maybe that's what we should aspire to. I don't know. You know, I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
Beyond my pay grade, but I think getting some new blood would be kind of nice.
So back to the well, we haven't really talked about racing that much, but back to the racing for just a second. But Rick, you're not only part of the fray or the face of the fray, you're a pretty good racer. I know you've finished second at least once because I've been there at the fray in the overall out of 90 people. And so you're not bad on the trigger also.
Well, you just drive it in a circle.
He's one of the best natural drivers I've ever seen. The only other guy that compares is Ron Richardson. Because if you remember the cars that we used, Ron Richardson used to run the 67 Fairlane, a blue one. And that thing was all over but he would use that. He would go into corners and just, you get in his way and you're gone. You know, you're out in the hay bale. But that's the style of racing that he's capable of. It doesn't matter the track, doesn't matter the conditions, doesn't matter the car. You know, if we went back to that old style, I'll put my money on him or Ron. They're both they're the same kind of. They went to school together in Ferndale, and they're kind of the same type of a racer.
He's also always up front. When we do club racing, he's been down to my area in Sacramento quite a few times and raced on some of our tracks. When we do our IROC racing,
that's it.
He's always up front.
Always. That's the type, and that's still my favorite kind of racing because we were handing out cars initially. It was always an IROC race.
Well, let's not get too ahead of ourselves because my understanding is that the 2023 fray will be whoever makes the A main. The A main is going to be an IROC race, and you put your cars away and you run the IROC cars for the A main. Don't tell anybody that.
I love the idea.
So going forward, we haven't had a fray for a while because of the pandemic, and the last fray was 2020.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, last one was in 2020.
So we missed 21, we missed 22, so we have a fray scheduled for 23.
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine, just like everything else, it may be bigger than ever just because of the circumstances.
You don't know what's coming at you. You never do. You never know exactly. People will ask me, "Oh, how many teams you got?" You don't know.
He cobbles them together like that day.
It's just a matter of it doesn't matter how many show up. It's a good event. You make sure it's a good event.
Yeah, it always is. And then a lot of the bench racing at the Eel River afterwards.
Yeah.
Rehash the events. Yeah.
Incidentally, don't let this go unnoticed. He does it all himself. That fray is run by one guy and he races. So let's consider that. Okay. By the way, I'm gonna make a plea to all you guys out there. Make sure that if you want to equalize this thing for him, all you good car builders, make sure you walk in the door and hand him a good car the first day, and then you'll see what a good racer he really is. Okay, because he's busy doing all that work for you with no help. All right, none at all. I certainly don't help him, and he still performs as well as he does. Come on, guys, give him a good car. You can do it.
So
You know,
there's a plea out to a few people that we all know.
That's correct. I'm aiming it at a few that, by the way, I'm not gonna name names, but I was
And,
definitely.
yeah, those builders out there, you know who you are. I'm not going to name names.
and there are some good ones.
Yes.
There's
sir.
a,
Yeah,
yeah, it's become a well, it's an art. Obviously, it's the meticulous building that you have to do to put one of these little toy HO cars. The tolerances are mind-boggling, and to get one of these things to run really fast is just a special thing for those builders that can do it.
Yeah, I find myself, I have to decide, am I going to work on the event or am I going to work on a car?
Well,
And,
the other thing that blows my mind, the first time I was there, is at the beginning of the day of team race, all the teams are introduced because your team is there, and then you have to pick a ball to see what team number, so see who you race at any given time. And Rick introduces everybody by name without any notes.
Yeah, I know. We were talking about that today.
So that's one of the things that I remember.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's just from the traveling, you gain a familiarity with a lot of people. So it's not like you met them all that day.
Well, you got a lot of thinking to do in that 400,000 miles in that car.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure.
So what is the future like for the Fray? Are there any new tracks on the horizon?
There's no,
He's gonna buy mine.
yeah.
Are we going to get rid of the purple table?
Actually, I've had a guy that has persistently pursued the orange table.
Ooh.
That wouldn't break my heart either.
Yeah. You know, it's really worked out very well where I've kept the purple table and the orange table at one end, and we do the team IROC racing on that and leave the tables that people like better. We'll put it that way, including the one that the individual competition will be on. And that way it's open all day Thursday for people that aren't doing the IROC racing, but it's available longer for people. We know which table it will be, and so there's not a big crowd on it with people waiting. And so I don't include those orange and purple tables in the team racing on Saturday unless we have enough teams, which it would take quite a few teams to do that. I mean, if you had over 16 teams, well, now we got to include one of them. But
yeah, if you're not familiar with the Fray, the team race with about 16 teams typically, so you have 8 races going on at any given time.
At any given time,
8 tracks just to run the event.
Yeah, it is. And what I've explained to people is, just imagine you could be on the red table racing a team from the Midwest, and a half hour later you go to the green table, you're racing a team from Southern California, and then you go to the blue table and you're racing a team from Alabama. You know, and every half hour it's a different team, different people. To have 80 to 100 people in the hall racing in that one day, and by the end of the day you personally have competed against most all of them.
Well, again, that's an amazing thing about the Fray, because you do have these teams. Obviously, this is in California, so there's 4 or 5 teams from California, but there's St. Louis, there's Midwest, there's Florida, there's Alabama.
Yeah.
So they're literally from all over the country, and you get to meet these people, and then you can go on social media and see them, because they all usually have pages on Facebook or whatever. The Alabama guys have a Facebook page. And the Midwest, and so you meet a lot of people. I've met some incredible people. The 2 people that come to mind are Jeff Kratz and Ron Schmidt, and I did an interview with them a while back. But
yeah,
they're amazing ambassadors for the sport.
That whole team, by the way, that whole team is special. Those guys know how to have fun.
Yeah,
they really do. That's a special. Hats off to those guys.
And then all my, the people that I've met from California, Rick Vogelin, Rick Jockum, Mitch Walder here. That's how I got into it. I raced these cars in the 60s, and there's actually people still racing them, and they're in Northern California. So the first race I went to was at Rick Vogelin's. I put a car together, built the parts. I go, I can be competitive. You go, oh, you got to build them? I just built the parts together. I put the parts on the car and figured I'd be competitive. And little did I know, but so there's Northern California is really a hotbed for Fray racing. St. Louis, a few other places, Wisconsin.
It reminds me of the first time SoCal showed up, and I think it was the 3rd Fray. or was it the second? It was the third fray. No, it was the second.
Second.
It was the second fray. They showed up with grand ideas, and they had some great guys on that team with Mike Englage and Joachim on the
Yep.
team at the time. They had some
Great
great
names,
guys.
probably.
And who's the guy that Scott that made the tracks?
Dunlop.
Dunlop. Okay. So they came in with some grand ideas, and Petaluma handed them their ass. And so the next year they came back again. I think it was the third.
It took them a couple of years.
Well, it took them a couple of years anyway, because Petaluma won the third year also. And then those guys started to take off. Shortly after that, Kansas City showed up, and two teams from Kansas City showed up.
Three
Well,
1 year.
3 1 year. And, the competition really got crazy at that point, because they were tuning these cars, with dial indicators. That was, it got to that point. So now 10,000ths of an inch started mattering.
Or
Started
less.
to matter, let's say. Yeah.
Yeah, of all the places I've been and go to races, what I've explained to people is every group has the same composition. And what I mean by that is when you go there, every group has a tall one, every group has a fat one, every group has the wrench who works on the cars, every group has the organizer. It's just who's playing what role, and all great guys.
Yeah.
But
All
you,
great
you've been doing all of that for the fray.
I'm not a car builder, that's for sure, but I can get around the track. So
Well, we've got the call out now for a car for you.
yeah, oh yeah,
that's-
I'm sure we're gonna get a
We'll
response.
see who steps up to the plate to that one.
Yeah,
I'll give you his address. Mail it to him.
yeah. So
It'll be really fast. It may not go through tech, but it'll be really fast.
well, historically, only one person has been disqualified from the AMA.
You want to name names, or just leave it at that?
It was me, which was a lesson in tech equipment. Because we had one scale measuring before the race and a different scale measuring after the race. And the one after the race was a little more accurate. So what I told Machado at that point, whatever is used pre has to be used post. It has to be the same one, the same instrument. So one of those lessons you learn along the way.
Yeah. So, well, I want to thank you guys, Bill, Bob, Rick, for being here. And before we sign off, where do you see the fray going, Rick? I mean, it's continued, and obviously it's evolved over the years from the cars and the tracks and everything else. Where do you see this going in the next 5-10 years?
Hopefully, I would just like to see it maintain the way it is as far as participants.
And that's definitely not a bad thing.
No, that's not a bad thing. With the pandemic ending, I've seen where other events have really been set back and haven't taken off as well. I don't know what's going to happen here, but I would like to just get back where we were and going again and enjoying all those same people. The camaraderie and competition was great.
Sounds awesome. Any updates on the 2023 fray? I know it was kind of business as usual.
Pretty much business as usual. Well, there'll be a few slight rule changes. The biggest one will probably be a downforce maximum, which I have yet to establish what that'll be. The idea there is that all cars that have previously raced in the fray will be legal to race again. So we wrote down, as we measured each car, the range of downforce that we had. And so it will be within that range of what's already existed.
So everything out there's
Meter,
yeah, to put that to rest, because I know a lot of people are concerned about that. So everything out there now is legal, but it's to prevent going in the future getting even more.
Over the years that we've done that, engaged it, we keep seeing it creeping upward. And so I just want to keep it right at where we left off last time we raced. So
And is the individual race on the gold table? Has that been decided, or is that still?
yeah, that's the only one left. They have 6 tables that we use for the individual. We've ran 5 of them. The gold one's the one that's left.
So it'd be a mad dash to the gold table next year.
It'll be open all week. It'll be there. You'll probably be the first one on it, Jim.
Oh, not my favorite, but it's okay. Yeah, my favorite was well, not my favorite, but I really do like the pink table, which I never thought the pink table, and it probably never would have been a final table if you hadn't changed it. So now that there's a rotation as opposed to just a vote, and everybody could vote on the track.
We did the rotation initially when we first started the fray, and we would have the previous year's winner pick a colored ball out of a box, and that would be the track. And then we just rotated it among the tables, and now we've got good tables and we've got more desirable tables. So we keep all the individual competition for the more desirable tables.
Yeah, then like I said, the four excuse me, the four most popular seem to be the black, the green, the tan, and the blue.
Yeah, and yeah, the blue one really slows things down because of the length.
Yeah, we have a blue table in Northern California now, so we're practicing on that.
Yeah,
the black table you mentioned is an extremely popular track. Everybody, make it hard. Everybody seems to like it because it does have a nice flow to it. It's relatively fast. It's not super tight. And so there's a variety there. The red track has some really tight.
Well, the red track lacks flow. There's the turns with the little straightaways in between.
Yeah.
It really doesn't have a flow. But that's a replication of what it was originally. So, and that I remember Henry Harnish, he hated that table. And he told me he spent 2 hours just practicing on it, and then it was his favorite table.
Well, you mentioned Henry. I mentioned before those Aurora races in the 60s that were nationally televised. He was one of the winners of one of those, as I recall.
He was the first winner.
And so he's still racing.
Yeah, he still races. He has an annual, I think it's the Labor Day weekend. Yeah, he has a race every Labor Day.
He's got a race every year. Yeah.
If you're not familiar with those races, Aurora had, I think, 4 or 5 or 6 of them in a row in the 60s. And the winner, which were typically teenage kids, because that's who was racing back then, got a full-size car.
Yeah.
Henry, the guys won a Mustang, one won a Thunderbird, and so on.
If I'm not mistaken, Bob Beers has 2 of those cars.
Yeah, he does. He has, I think, the Mustang and the Thunderbird.
Mustang.
So if you're into history, look up Bob Beers.
Yeah,
he's got all that stuff.
It's been a pleasure being around all the history of the hobby, and somehow my name got me in. I don't know why, but I'm grateful. I'm grateful for it. By the way, where'd you get the pink paint?
At the lumberyard.
Okay, you actually chose that?
Well, you kind of ran out of base colors.
Yeah, there you go.
The other one left was pink. So
pink. That's right. Okay.
Well,
I wondered about that.
I want to thank you guys. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Rick, and Bill as well. And anything either of you two want to say as we wrap this up?
I'm good.
We'll see you in March.
See you in March. It's been thank you very much for doing this. Oh, yes. I need somebody watching this. If you know how to set up a wiki page for the fray, man, are we overdue for that. And I can't find anybody to do it. I tried, and they ended up banning me from the ability to do it because I was so bad at it. It's not easy. So if anybody knows how and can donate their time for this, let's get I think we all agree that the fray needs a wiki page.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been your approach.
Isn't the fray if you look at wiki on slot cars, I think the fray is in there, but
I added that one paragraph. I think it's still there. Other than that, I know of no reference to the fray.
Well, it's an amazing event, and thank both of you for getting this going back in the 90s and so on, because it's grown, it's huge, it's worldwide, it's competition. I think most people will think it's the camaraderie that they remember, and the friendships and things that will last far past the trophies that sit on the wall. And so thank you guys again. And this is Jim Rose with NorCal Slot Car Scene. We'll see you in March.
Thank you, Jim.